resource people who are on the call to help answer questions, and that's Ann Haas and Kata Mihai from RAND, Dan McCaffrey from ETS, and Mark White from the Institute for Social Research here at the University of Michigan, and Arun Mathur here at Icpsr, and all of them have played important roles in the MET project, and they're generously giving their time to help answer questions on this webinar. So this webinar is about new data that we've added to the MET longitudinal database, but I wanted to start by just giving a brief overview of the MET data. MET is a very large and diverse collection of data. Many of the MET reports emphasize observation scores, value-added measures, and the student perception survey, but there are a number of other measures in the data set. The main measures are observation scores, which are coded from videos that were taken by the teachers themselves, but we also have data about composition of classes, we have district-wide data, we also have the videos themselves. So there's a lot going on in the MET data, which if you haven't used the MET data before, we'll be happy to answer questions about. But we're here today to talk about new data that we've added to the collection with the support of a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And there are three main things that we've done. The first is we've added district-wide data for 3 school years from 2011 to 2013. The MET project was originally just 2 years, but there was a MET extension project that had somewhat different goals, and we now have district-wide data from all students in the 6 school districts in grades 4 through 8, which can be used to compute the value-added scores. In addition, we have updated all of the district-wide data with what we're calling Icpsr Global Ids, which now allow students and teachers to be linked across years in those data. So, in fact, students and teachers can be linked across actually 6 years of data at the district level for various things, which we'll talk about a little bit today. The district-wide files have also been upgraded by harmonizing variable names across all districts and years, and we have revised code in the SAS language for computing value added. Secondly, for those of you who have used the MET data before, you may be familiar with the randomization file. That file previously could be linked to students and teachers in the MET project, but not to students and teachers outside the MET project or to the district-wide files, and that file has been upgraded with these global IDs. And finally, for the first time, we're making available scores that were assigned by raters who on the 5 observation instruments, and this is data from the administrative system that manage the scoring, and we have 2.4 million scored items. Included among those items are scores that were done to maintain the standards of the scoring, which are the calibration and validation scores, which we'll talk about a little bit. So this is one of our documents that tries to orient you to the organization of the MET data. And there are 3 main areas of data. First of all, there are the core files. This is a set of files that Mark White, who's on the call, created, which try to bring together the the main data sets in a consistent way across all of the different measures. We strongly recommend that people who analyze the MET data use the core files whenever they can. There are some things that are not in the core files, but if you can do your work based on the core files, you'll save yourself a lot of work. But for those who need the other files, there's the what we call the base data, or the full MET sample, which includes all of the data that we received for MET in all of the different instruments. So there are some teachers and students who, for various reasons, don't appear in the core files, but if we have any piece of information about them, you can find it in these base data files. And thirdly, there are the district-wide files, which report data on all of the students from the annual state assessment tests across each of the 6 MET districts. And it's here that we've added these additional years of data to the database. This slide gives you some idea of the number of students and teachers in the core files. You can see that we actually start with 2,700 teachers and 137,000 students who are what we consider to be MET teachers or MET students. That means that they were teachers who volunteered to participate in the MET project and to collect not only various data sets, but also to videotape their classes, and those videos were then used for observation scoring. And then the students, MET students, are students who appeared in the classroom of one of those teachers in one of the 2 MET years. So you can see, and as you can see, they're quite a large collection by themselves. You can find information about all of this information by going to the MET longitudinal database website, and on this screen, which directs you to the data, you can find links to each of the different kinds of data. I particularly wanted to point out that each of these links has an Icpsr study number. Studies are a unit of organization here at Icpsr, so studies have files within them, and as you can see, there are 7 different studies where we've assigned data to them to provide some internal organization. When you click on one of these links, you'll be taken to a web page that looks that has a lot more information than this, but this is an expert that tells you about the various kinds of information in that particular study. And the first study, the study information group, is the one where we strongly recommend you start. And in particular, I wanted to call your attention to the user guide. The user guide is based on a description of the core files that Mark wrote with Brian Rowan. And we've tried to put everything that we know about the MET data into the user guide. It explains what we know about randomization and various other things. So it's as comprehensive as we can make it. So we strongly recommend that if you're using the MET data, you start here. And this has now been updated to describe the additional data that we've just released. One of the things that you'll find in the user guide and as an auxiliary file when you download from the information from the website is this sort of table of the organization of files in the MET LDB. And what I call your attention to here is that this table indicates which kinds of IDs are present in each file. And so if you want to know if you can link, find information about schools or aggregate to classrooms or to schools, you can find that here because you can see whether the ID for the school or the section is present. And if you want to link from one file to another file by student ID or by teacher ID, this helps you figure out which files you can link to. So now about the district-wide data. So the district-wide data is individual test scores for all students in these districts. In math, there's one score for math and one score for English. And these data were necessary for computing the value-added measures that play a large role in the reports written about the MET project. Dan can explain this in more detail, but my quick version of what a value-added score is that it compares the actual test scores in a class or for a teacher to the what would be predicted based on the attributes of those students and test scores in previous years, given the data for the entire district. Now, in addition to that, in the second year of the MET project, the students were randomly assigned to teachers. This is known as the randomization experiment. Now, unfortunately, not all students wound up in the section that they were assigned to, but you can, in the data set, find the randomization file, which you can use to determine for each district and each classroom how successful the randomization was. What we've added now is 3 additional years of data, so for the school years 2011 to 2013, and we have district-wide data for all students in grades 4 through 8. As I mentioned earlier, we previously released the first 2 years of the district-wide data, but with IDs that were not compatible with other years. And rather than remove those IDs, we've added a new ID, which in these data sets is called an Icpsr Global Id. And there are global IDs for teachers and global IDs for students. These global IDs allow you to link across years in the district-wide data, as well as linking from the district-wide data to the other data, the core data or the base data. So while the IDs in the core data have always been consistent, they were not consistent with the IDs in the district-wide data, and that is what we're now providing. This was a very complicated process. There were something like 10 different ID systems in these data, and I'm very grateful to Kata and Anne and their colleagues at RAND who helped us solve this problem. When we started, I think Dan was betting that we couldn't actually link across years, and I believe that we did it. In addition to that, we've also upgraded the district-wide data over the previous release by harmonizing the names of variables across all the years in all the districts. In the previous release, some variables about student characteristics had different variable names in one district or in a different year, and now they're all harmonized to make it easier to write programs on these data. RAND has very kindly provided us with the programs that they used for computing the value-added measures that appear in the MET publication. Those programs were written in SAS. Now, again, in the previous release, we had a SAS program for each of the different districts in each year. So every data set came with its own SAS program. What we've done is, again, with a lot of help from Anne and Kata, is to write just 2 SAS programs which operate on all the districts in all the years. They use some SAS macros in creative ways, and for all of you, those of you who just love writing programs code in SAS, but they are a place to start if you want to know how to compute value-added measures. This doesn't mean that you have to use SAS. Icpsr also provides these data in ASCII, SPSS, Stata, and R. But if you want to see what was done at RAND for the publications, you can find that in these programs. I did want to note that the data in the MET LDB, for some privacy reasons, is not exactly the same as the data that was used in the publications. So you should not expect to get the same results to the second decimal place, but your results should be very consistent with the results in the publications. This graphic gives you a sense of how much data we're providing. This shows, if you start with students in the 4th grade, you can, in the district-wide data, you can link 800,000 students from a test score in grade 4 to a test score in grade 5, and 257,000 of those students can be linked from a test score in grade 4 to a test score in grade 8. So the district-wide data really is a lot of data to work with for these things. And we have some ideas about what we hope people will do. So first of all, you can take the various measures in the MET project of student perception scores and observation scores, and previously you could use those to predict what that teacher's value-added score would be, or what a student's performance could be in that year. But now you can use that information to predict how a student is going to perform 1 or 2 or 3 years later. So in other words, how long do the effects of a good teacher persist? And you can look at what measures in the MET data predict the persistence of effects of good teaching. And finally, a lot of things can be done just using the district-wide data themselves on questions like how consistent are these teacher measures from year to year, because now for many teachers you have 4 years of data in the district-wide data on that teacher. The other big thing that's completely new are these observation scores. The MET project collected about 22,000 classroom videos. Of those classroom videos, about 15,000 of them were scored. ETS, which managed this process with help from the Teachscape, set up a web-based platform for doing this scoring, and they employed more than 900 raters to score the videos. They also set up quite an amazing system for maintaining the quality of the rating. So raters were first tested before they were allowed to score any videos, and then after they had been approved to do rating, each time they started a session to begin scoring, they were presented with master scored videos to make sure that they were scoring the same way as expected. If they did not score these calibration videos acceptably, they were told to speak on the phone to a supervisor, and then even after they passed the calibration, they randomly were assigned validation videos to see if they were still scoring consistently, and those validation scores are also part of this database. So it has a very large collection of scores on the various observation protocols. And what do we think can be done? Well, one is to do studies of the properties of the scores of these protocols, and we hope that this will advance our knowledge on that. Quite simply, you can see, based in these data, which are the protocols where the raters were more likely to fail on either the calibration or the validation test in each protocol. And finally, we can test if calibration scores are predictive of operational agreement rates. So, a word about access to the MET LDB. Because of privacy concerns and FERPA, all of the MET data and videos are restricted to protect confidentiality. Now, that doesn't mean that the codebooks are restricted. The codebooks on all the data are open and available from the MET LDB website and the Icpsr website. But in order to use the quantitative data, you need to obtain a data use agreement, and then the data are available by remote access in what Icpsr calls a virtual data enclave. And the videos are provided by secure streaming, the same sort of thing you get with Netflix. To apply for access to the videos, we suggest you go to the MET LDB website, which looks like this, and you'll find there additional information about how to apply for access, how the virtual data enclave works, how the video player works, and links to a lot of other information about the MET project. So, and questions. So we've gotten 2 questions so far. And the first question is, will the slides be available after the webinar? And the answer is yes. We're recording this webinar, and the webinar will be available on YouTube after, as soon as it gets edited. And the slides will be there as well, and there'll be a link on the MET LDB website to the recording, or if you go to YouTube, Icpsr has its own channel on YouTube, and if you go there, you can find it that way. And the second question is, what were you surprised by in the new data? I think so. I haven't analyzed the data. Yeah, maybe Dan or one of the other people at RAND has something that they might want to say about what they learned from the MET extension project. my main reaction at this point is relief that we were able to do all of the recoding and re-IDing that we did. So I'm seeing this as the data archivist, not as an analyst. I don't know, Dan, is there anything that you would say about new things that came out of MedExtension? Dan's phone looks like it's muted. Oh, there we go.
Hi, this is Kata. I can chime in just to say that I agree, George. I think the thing we are most, I wouldn't say surprised, but just relieved about is that we were able to make these linkages, and hopefully it'll be a great resource for researchers who want to use the metadata.
Thank God. So, other questions? Please use the chat box. Okay, the question, are there any restrictions to obtaining student data and linking them with student demographic information? No. The student demographic information is part of the data set. Now, you cannot link to data outside the Met LDB unless you have, to do that, you would need to get permission from the school districts. But within the Met LDB, for the district-wide data, there is already information on race, ethnicity, and in sex and age, and in some of the most of the districts, it also indicates whether the students are getting in the school lunch program or in gifted and talented class. And that information is already there. If you're working with the core data, there's a lot more information about each student because there are additional test instruments and survey instruments and a whole lot of information about both the students and the teachers. So I guess the answer is that linking to other things about the students outside of what's in the Met data is not possible without a lot of work. But there is a lot of demographic information in the data itself. So, other questions? Okay, we haven't gotten any other questions. I was just wondering maybe if Dan is still on, or Kata, or Ann, or Mark, if you have other suggestions for types of studies that you hope people will do with the data. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about the kinds of things you've been looking at?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. Before I talk about what I'm doing, one thing that I think would be interesting to look at is there's data on alignment of teachers' instruction to videos, so to the state test, sorry. So it'd be interesting to look if teachers who are more providing instruction that's more aligned to a test have teacher effects that persist across time at lower rates. So you kind of get a boost immediately on an immediate test, but that test boost kind of fades away faster when the instruction's more aligned. In terms of what we're looking at, we're using the calibration data to think about what are the actual sources of rate or error. And are raters having trouble because, like, is rater error caused by difficulty understanding items, or raters being too lenient or harsh on specific items? Or is it more related to the process of applying a specific item to a specific video? So we're trying to kind of break down the sources that are caused by rater error. And one interesting thing that I can say that we're finding in some initial work is that the calibration videos, the raters scored them multiple times. The raters frequently don't agree with the score they gave the last time in the calibration videos. So there's kind of a lot of scoring occasion error in the calibration data, which is interesting.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mark. I hope that will give people some ideas. Anne or Kata, are there any things that you want to mention? Unfortunately, Dan is having trouble with the microphone on his phone. But you know, are there things that you were thinking about that when working on the project that you'd like to see followed up on?
This is Kata. I mean, I personally haven't been using the data very much, but I think the ideas that you mentioned are really great. And I know that a lot of people were interested in especially in looking at the persistence of value added, you know, after the MET study. And so having these IDs, I think, was really a key factor in making that possible. I think there's, you know, a lot more that can be done with being able to follow both students and teachers over time.
Great. Thanks, Kata. Okay. Any other questions? Does anyone have questions about how to get access? Oh, here we go. The question is, if a teacher or school district stumbles on these data, are there any takeaways for those teaching today? Also, are they all restricted access? In terms of takeaways for school districts, actually, I believe in the publications of the MET project, you will find a lot of takeaways for schools. I recall that during the project, there were some examples of school districts who were in the project that actually changed their teacher training because of results of the project. And if you go to the MET LDB website, you will find links to publications of the MET project, but there's also on the Gate Foundation website a MET project website that has links to various publications. And in addition to that, there have been a number of publications by other researchers, not in the MET project, about the data. Now, are they all restricted? Yes. Everything in the MET project is that we're providing is restricted access. However, in the MET extension project, which was in which a smaller number of teachers generated a larger number of videos, it is possible those videos are available with more widely and under different conditions. So Dan, it looks like your microphone is working. Are there some things that you're willing to add?
No, I don't really have a whole lot to add. I agree with what Mark was saying. I think the calibration data adds a lot of interesting opportunities to study the relationship between calibrations and how raters actually score. You can't look at it the day they calibrate, but you can see how calibration predicts future scoring, which I think is a unique resource that that we haven't had a large opportunity to look at in other contexts like this.
Okay. And so, Dan, has more work been done on different versions of the value-added computations? Do you think that there are new possibilities for doing things in that area?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things with MET, the value-added computations we did there were kind of simple. They were, and there's a lot of other things that people have looked at and done with value-added that I think people could try alternative value-added models to see how the results look. I don't know if people have done much of that in the way of having done that yet, and other research that people have done with this. But clearly, given that there is these data, people could try alternative value-added models on them.
Okay, so we do have a question, which is, what are the new measures for the data in years 2011, 12, and 13? Is it just standardized academic test measures, or does it include extension data for the student perception surveys, etc.? And the answer is that from the 3 additional years, we only have the state test data with the student characteristics. So we do not have additional measures for the student perception surveys and so on. Those surveys are only available for the 2 years of the MET project proper, which were 2009-10 and 2010-11. But of course, those measures for teachers or for students can be linked to test scores now in the 3 additional years. Any other questions? Let me just, Okay, let me just mention that Arun Mathur is on the call. Arun is the person at Icpsr who will help you get access to the data and guide you through the obtaining a data use agreement. That process involves filling out things online. Arun, are there any particular things that you want to mention that would make things easier for people to go through the paperwork?
I'm not sure. I think communicating with us a lot during the application process is probably a good idea. The VD application system that you have to use to get the metadata can be pretty cumbersome, and even for us. So, I mean, we are working on fixing it, but we find that this process does require more hand-holding than applying for other restricted data here.
Okay, and Arun's job is to hold your hand.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you need help, don't hesitate to ask for it. Okay, well, if there are no other questions from the audience, let me just ask if any of the other panelists want to add anything. Dan, Arun, Kata, Mark.
The only thing I would add is I know I work with people here at ETS who actually use the metadata to do secondary analysis, and it's work to get the opportunity to use it. But the fact that Icpsr is so willing to help you to get the application in and get the access to the data, it really is great, the kinds of analyses people can do with it. So I would encourage people, if they're thinking of something, to work with them, and the Icpsr people are very helpful and have been for a long time.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great note to end on. So thank you all for attending, and thanks very much to the panelists for being willing to talk about the data and answer questions. And Anna, I think we'll stop here.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. We will send out the link to the recording following this webinar. Thank you all for being here and have a wonderful afternoon.
You too. Thanks.
Okay, bye. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.